check it out. Hey, what's up guys and gals? Today's video is for all you talented people who craft custom items, design them, do 3D modeling, 3D printing, but you kind of want to take it to the next step. You want to be able to cast them in different colors, maybe translucent, kind of like this one here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to run through essentially a noob's guide for doing the silicone molding and the resin casting. I'm a complete newbie at this myself. I've only ever done it twice, which you can see here. Didn't really work too well, but I kind of got the gist of it, so I'm going to give it a try and we'll film the progress and I'll explain what I'm doing while I'm doing it, so you can learn with me, and hopefully at the end of it we'll be able to make some cool cast. So this is definitely not a video on how to recast other items you have. However, since I'm not skilled in 3D modeling or have access to a 3D printer, for the sake of explaining and showing how to make the silicone molds and casting with resin, I will be using these random items I just so happen to have lying around home. It should be a good example. For these ones we'll have to do a double cast, so a split mold like this one here and this one. Whereas for this one I think we should be able to just lay it down flat, pour the silicone over top, and then when we pour resin just do it from the top and it should go flat. So there'll be a cool experiment and see how that turns out. Before we get into the actual molding process, let's move the stuff out of the way and I'll quickly go through what we'll be using, the items that are needed for the process. So there are timestamps for this video, so if you're watching this for the second time through, if you're wanting to follow along, or if you already know parts and you just want to skip ahead, do check those out. This is going to be a pretty long video, so I'll try and speed up the areas where possible. Otherwise, yeah, just use those timestamps. So obviously the basis for making these is the silicone. You have to use this to make the molds, and it's pretty simple actually. It comes in two parts. I'm using the Mr. Silicone 1 kg tin here. Now this is readily available in Japan at all model shops, hobby shops and online retailers. So depending on the country that you're in, the what you have access to will vary, but overall I would say every model shop should have something similar. It seems like it's pretty common to be used in model railways for creating the dioramas and so forth. So if you can't find it, check out those areas. And Amazon should have a good selection as well. So the silicone itself is actually two parts. You've got the main silicone here, and then you've got the hardening agent. And each, I guess, silicone version, you'll have a different ratio. So for this one in particular, says in the box here, the mixing weight ratio is 100 to 4. So what that means is for every 100 grams of silicone you need 4 grams of your hardening agent. So before you can really do anything, you also need to get yourself some scales. I do recommend some good electronic scales. These are cheap kitchen ones and it will do the job well. So you just chuck, for example, a plastic cup, pour in your 100 grams of silicone, then your 4 grams of hardener, mix it up and you're good to go. And that's something that we'll go over shortly. Before you can actually make your mold, you have to have something that can contain the silicone, right? Otherwise when you pour it, it's just going to go everywhere. So to contain the silicone, I've got these. It's from, who is it by? Mr. Hobby, I think. Okay, it's the same guys that make the silicone. And yeah, these are just a common item sold here in Japan in the hobby section for this. And it's basically just a cheap, easy to come apart Lego brick. So you can use these to stack up and to create a area where you pour your silicone in. However, if you don't have access to this, you can use normal Lego if you really want. But you can just simply use cardboard, tape in a couple of cardboard boxes together. You can use some plastic, basically anything that will hold the silicone in the area that you're pouring. So for example, for this mold, it's a little bit square shape, so you just make a square all the way around, and then you pour in your silicone and you're good to go. However, when you're wanting to make a two-part mold like this, you need something to temporarily go where one side will be. So to do that, you can just use some modelling clay. Now this is clay again, sold in the area with the silicone. It's all used for it, and you can use it more than once as long as you don't let it dry out. So as an example, I've got half a mould left for this one here, and all it was, put the clay in the bricks, and then you squeeze in the item that you want to mould. That goes in there, and then you pour your silicone over top, and that will create the 1/2. And again, this is something that we'll be going over shortly with the process. This clay itself is cheap. It's like 200 yen. It's under 300 yen, maybe 250. I think it's for like 1 kg of clay. So yeah, cheap and reusable, which is fantastic. So yeah, that basically covers everything you need for actually making a mould. I did also pick up this cheap sort of spatula scraper from the 100 yen shop. It's just good for scraping it out of a cup. And these cups I bought as a pack from the 100 yen store as well. So I just mix it in here, give it a good stir, and then pour it in, and nice and simple. And yeah, this takes what, 6 to 8 hours to dry and set, so it does take quite a while. I believe you've got 20 minutes from when you mix it before it kind of gets unworkable, and then you leave it for another 6 to 8 hours and it'll go hard, and then you can work on the next half. So this isn't really something you can do in a day. You kind of need a couple of days set aside for the whole process, because you have to do one side at 6 hours, next side 6 hours, and then you have to do your resin. So you can probably make a mould starting in the morning, pour the resin in the evening, and then you're kind of good to go. But yeah, so it's not really a quick 5-10 minute job, so when you do this, make sure you do have that time available. One extra part before we go into the resin is this here. It's a Mr. Silicone barrier from the same company as the silicone here. There's different versions of this you can buy, and what this does, once you made 1/2 of a mould, you just paint it on, brush it on, and when you pour the second mould half, it means you can peel off easy. It doesn't allow the resin to stick to the other resin permanently. You don't need it, but it does help. Okay, so now onto the resin. The one that I've opted to use is the Crystal Clear Resin. The Crystal Resin by Resin, I believe it is. Yeah, Resin Resin. So the type of resin you get does vary a lot. There's special UV resin which will harden with just UV light. It's good for like little bit small items, but you do need a direct sunlight or a UV light for it. Whereas the other epoxy resins, they will harden via a chemical reaction. So for this one here, it's similar to the Mr. Silicone here. You've got two parts. You got the main resin, and then you got the hardening agent, and you mix it in. So this one here has a ratio of 100 to 50. So for every 100 grams of resin, you put in 50 of the hardening agent. Mix it up, and then you're good to go. Depending on the resin, a lot of resin you'll probably buy won't be clear. It'll be like a ivory color, white color, grey, or so forth. And those ones will generally harden a lot faster, so you don't have much time to work with them. The crystal clear one here, however, you have, I believe it's 90 minutes to work with it before it gets unworkable, and then it takes another 24 to 36 hours to set. So yeah, that's one of the big benefits with this, especially starting out. You have lots of time to pour, mix, and work with it. Plus, depending on the resin you use, since the ones that only have a small working time, generally that resin is cheaper, but since that reaction is a lot more violent, you get a lot more air bubbles, and it gets really hot. And you can counteract that by using like a pressure pot. So once you pour it, you put it in a pot and you raise the pressure, and it will force the air bubbles out. Unfortunately, I don't have anything like that, and I feel most people won't have access to it unless you dive deep into this hobby. So if you're just practicing, so like, yeah, the crystal resin here is really good. Since it's 90 minutes, it's a very slow reaction. You don't really get many air bubbles. So this is the first test I did, and yeah, it looks really good going through. I had one huge air bubble here, but this is more of a design fault in my mold, which I'll talk about shortly. There's a couple of small air bubbles down the bottom here, but again, not too bad considering it was like the first time. This other item which I poured at the same time, yeah, it looks really good. There's no real air bubbles at all, so this looks really good if you're a beginner. For this one here, it's a 300 gram set, and yeah, it's 3,000 yen, so not super cheap. But silicone is about the same price as well. But yeah, gives great results. And yeah, for miscellaneous tools, things you need, I recommend a paintbrush if you're using the silicone barrier. I've got like a Tamiya paint mixer. This is quite good for using on the clay, and just a model knife as well, and some clippers to clip off the excess resin from the runners and pour holes. So yeah, I think that should be all the equipment out of the way. If anything else pops up while we're making it, I will explain at that point. But the first thing we need to do is start making the silicone mold. So yeah, I'll move this stuff out and we'll start on the first item. Okay, so before we can start pouring the mold and mixing the silicone, we need to work out the base area for these items that we're going to pour and how we're going to do it. And then we need to get the clay, make a base, and the frame. So first things first, you need to look at the item and just kind of figure out a best way to pour. So let's have a quick look at the first one I did. And we can check out a couple of the problems that I had. So for this one here, it was this long kind of key blast attack. It has the big end, small end, and the pipe down the middle, and it had a peg hole. I tried to get the peg hole in there, which kind of worked, but not enough silicone went in. So I know this time when I put the silicone, I feel like I probably have to force the silicone into the hole to make sure it goes to the very bottom. And so essentially, this is the item goes in, and I poured in from this side, but I feel like in hindsight that was a bad idea. I had a big air bubble that appeared at the top. So what happened, when it was in, I was pouring in, the silicone got in, and then the air bubble occurred, and then it couldn't really escape because it was at the very top point. So I think for these ones, what I might do, instead of pouring from the side, I'll do the mold vertical, have the bottom, the bigger area at the very bottom, and then pour from the top. Hopefully that will give us a better job and we won't get any horrible air bubbles stuck in there. To help with the air escape, I did put some areas. So there's 1, 2, 3, I think I had 4 here for the air to escape, but it wasn't quite enough. So yeah, that should help, I believe. So for example, for this one, if it's like this, have it pouring from the very top, it will slowly fill up with resin, the air will go to the top, and then eventually come out, and you can put some vents on the side here. I think that should work at least. We won't know until we fully cast it, but for now that is the plan. You might be wondering why these look kind of ugly. There's kind of a hole here and a big ball. To make sure the molds line up when you join them, you kind of want to have some areas which are unique. So I had some extra clay, so I just stuck it there. I thought, oh, this should work. It did. Not exactly the most prettiest thing. So we'll try and get a nicer mold for these ones. Because if you do the mold really well, you can reuse it. I believe, depending on the type of resin you use, anywhere up to 50 times before the mold will deteriorate. So if you spend the time, make the mold really clean, tidy, in the first go, you'll be able to get a lot of casts out of it, which will greatly reduce the overall cost you are putting in, since, well, the raw materials aren't cheap. Now that we have a rough idea how we want to pour these, I believe probably stagger them a little bit since I've got the bigger area at the bottom, so kind of like this, and that should work out good. So let's kind of roughly line it up, and then we'll get our bricks and make our frame around. We don't want to go too big because we don't want to waste the silicone either. Now since this comes apart quite easy, I might get some tape and just put it around the corners to make sure the parts don't fall off while we're putting in the clay. So our frame is all sorted now. Last time I did this, I kind of just got the clay, softened it up, push it in to the sides, and I mean it kind of worked, but as you saw before, the mold's pretty ugly. So this time what I might do, get a bunch of the clay, kind of roll it out, get it smooth, find the size and kind of cut it and place it in. And then from there we'll take the item and push it into the clay, and hopefully that will do the job nicely. And then we can add on our lines for pouring and so forth. Okay, that was actually a lot harder than what I thought it would be. The clay's actually, when it warms up, it gets easier to use, but since there's so much in this mould, it was quite difficult to roll in. My wrist is still sore, so I dug out a rolling pin, and that did help move it along quite a bit. I'm not 100% sure if this is going to work really well. When putting the clay in the mould, I moved it over onto this plastic clear file. That's because once it's all in, it's going to be a bit hard to move, so I want it on top of something that I don't mind getting silicone on, and I still need this workboard for other things. So that's why it's moved over. Rolled out the clay. I did it in 2 layers, got the base layer in, and I got the rest of the clay, rolled it out, put it in. Didn't quite get it to the side, so it's a big strip down the middle. Pushed in the effects here that we want to get the mould of, and the peg holes, I've got them facing up, so when the silicone pours in, we're going to try and push it in. For these ones, we're going to pour it from the top, so I put extra clay up here to make a bit of an opening for the silicone mould. The silicone is easy to cut with a knife, but I figured just save a bit of time and make it a bit easier so we know where to cut. We put the clay there to have that indentation. So the effect plaster has been tidied up. Next part we're going to do is this effect. So I think it's the base for those. So I've got another clear file that I'm going to use. I'm going to stick this down and build the frame around. So before we stick anything down, let's get some bricks and get a nice area and frame set up. Okay, so the mould has been set up to the right size for the item. I've gone quite a bit higher than what we need to, and when we pour it in we can just gauge the level that we need. We don't want to go too close to the top point here, so maybe about 5 or so mil above that should be sufficient, I believe. So what I'm going to do to stick this down, I've got some tape. I'm just going to run some tape underneath this and then just stick that down, and that should do the trick. So yeah, it's going to pull the tape tight. Go straight down the center and loop it around. Now if we lay this flat, we should be able to take our item that we want to cast and just stick it to the tape and it will hold. Okay, so we've got our 2 moulds now. So the next step is going to be to mix the silicone and pour it in. So I've got the scales here ready. I've also put on some gloves. If you're pro and not going to touch anything, you can get away without wearing them, but to be on the safe side, I do recommend, since you are dealing with chemicals, especially with a resin one, you want to use them for that. Silicone, you're probably a bit safer. Anyway, before we get started, a couple of things I'm going to do. Actually, before I pour the resin, for the key effects, or the blast effects, since it's quite textured, I'm actually going to apply some of that silicone barrier on the item, especially around the plug hole, and hopefully that will allow the silicone to come out easier without it ripping. We shouldn't have any issues if we don't use it, but I've got it here, so I might as well use it. So it's got an old paintbrush which I will use. It's kind of like a weird milky type, hopefully you can see, it's kind of like a clear kind of watery milk like item. So I'm just going to brush it over top. So onto the silicone. As I was saying at the start of the video, this one here has a ratio of 100 to 4. So for every 100 milligrams of silicone you need 4 of the hardener. I've used majority of this already, so I'm just going to mix it all up, so I don't really need to weigh everything, but just so I know how much silicone I am using for future reference, especially when we do the other half of this, we'll measure it. So let's turn on the scales, put the cup on, and it's 12 grams. I'll just zero it. I just pause it quickly to turn the aircon on. Before we open this up and use the silicone and resin for that matter, you need good ventilation. It's raining currently, so it's really noisy if I open up the door, so for the time being I'll just use the aircon, and once I've finished pouring everything I'll crack the door open. So yeah, make sure you're well ventilated. Don't do this in a closed room. This is basically the same consistency that you have when you put in the hardener. Okay, so I managed to scrape out 250 grams of resin from the tin. Look at this. It might be just enough for this one over here, the smaller one. I think we're going to need more for this mold. So what I'll do, I'll kind of move away the tin, clear up a little bit of space, and we can put in the hardener, mix it up and pour it in. Move the tin off to the side, and we've got 250 grams of actual silicone, which means we need 10 grams of a hardener. There should be 10 grams left in here, but I will measure it when I pour in just to make sure in case they have extra in this bottle. There's meant to be about 40 grams in here in total. Once we pour this in, you're going to have 20 minutes before this becomes unworkable. So before you mix, get everything ready, measure out, pour in, stir, mix, pour, and it should be good. If it ends up being this is not enough, I should have enough time to crack open the new tin, mix up some more silicone and add it to the mixture. Okay, I've changed the camera so you should be able to see me pour it in. It's going to hold the cup up high, get rid of those air bubbles, and just slowly pour it in on top. So it's been about 7-8 hours now, and I've basically cleaned up the mess here. You can see there's still some silicone on the mat, but I'll show you in a moment. It's actually pretty easy to come off. It just basically peels off anything. I've got the cup here as well. So yeah, if you do have a cup and you pour some silicone in, just leave it there, let it dry, and then you should just be able to peel it off. You do make a little bit of a mess with the cleanup, but for the most part it should just easily peel right off the cup. So, thing you see here, you can just grab part and it just peels away. So you can reuse the cup over and over, which is really cool. So it's not really one use, which is very good considering it's a bit of a waste just using a plastic cup one time. I'll leave this for later, and for now let's check out the first mold. So since it's had plenty of time to set and dry, the spilled silicone is all fine, it's all hard and it will peel off fine. One thing I have noticed here, you can just see the very tip of the item that we were covering, which really sucks. So the spillage that I had due to my stupidity of lifting this before it's set, meant the wastage has made that show. But it's just a tiny amount, so I don't think it'll be too much of an issue. Maybe just put some tape over there to prevent any resin from leaking out, but I believe it should be fine. Anyway, let's take all the tape off, I guess. So that's all the blue bricks popped off, and the side areas just basically peeled right off, because if it's super thin the silicone just tears easily, so it's not too much of an issue. But you can see there's quite a bit of wasted silicone that popped out from underneath when I so stupidly lifted it up to move it to the side. But yeah, mistakes made and learnt from them, won't do that again. So now what we need to do is just go through and kind of tidy up the rest of the mold. A lot of these little bits here should just be able to peel off. If not, you can just get the hobby knife and cut them. Now that the mold is all cleaned, the next step is going to be popping it out. I am going to have to be careful though, because as I mentioned before, there's a tiny little wee dot here. I wonder if you can see that, where the very tip of the item is just poking through. I think it has pierced the surface ever so slightly. So when we push the item out, we should be careful that we don't make it bigger. So when you want to take it out, since it's basically airtight or air sealed around there, just need to slowly break the seals around the side of the item, just kind of stretch it out. Since silicone is pretty, I guess, stretchy and flexible, and it'll hold its shape again once you let go. You don't have to be that gentle with it, I don't believe. So yeah, only thing I think might have to be careful of here is the center part, where we have a peg hole, because when we take it out we don't want to rip that part. So I'm not really sure the best way to go about this is. So let's keep slowly. Oh, okay. I think it's slowly moving away. If we can try and loosen it up and just kind of get enough to grip on it, should be able to plop it out. Boom, there we go. Awesome. That's pretty gnarly in there. Look at this, might be a bit of a pain to get all the resin all the way into those holes, but I guess we'll find out once we pour it. I guess one good thing is we can just kind of jiggle it about, push it down, and hopefully maybe get a toothpick or something to poke in there to get rid of any air bubbles. Quite looking forward to seeing how this will turn out actually, but overall I think it's looking really cool. So what we'll do, we'll put this to the side now, and we will flip this over and take the clay out. I've cleaned it up basically as best as I can so far. There's still a bit of clay stuck here and here and around the top, so I think what I actually really need to do is pop these out, then I can trim up the sides here to get all nice and clean and smooth, and get rid of any clay in here before we do the second half of the mold. So yeah, hopefully this pops out well. Okay, so it's been a day now, and this is basically a decent amount of time to fully set and make sure it's all hard. And I've gone and picked up some more silicone in case we need it. Hopefully we have enough left in the tin here to do a top layer. We definitely won't need as much as what we did this time when we did this one here. But just in case we run short, I'll be able to quickly make another batch or add to it. So what we need to do is clean up the mold, just these little extra flippy bits of silicone. Get rid of that, so it's a nice smooth line. Now I'm going to use the molder knife, and I have just replaced the knife on here, so it's a brand new one, so it should be nice and sharp. I guess we can test that out on the side here, I guess. Hopefully it trims things well. Yeah, look at that, just smooths. Goes through like a hot knife through butter. So yeah, I'm going to take my time here and just try and just easily go, just ease my way down the line here, and hopefully that will work. So yeah, let's give it a shot. Yeah, that's pretty good, I think. What else do we need to do? There's still a little bit of clay kind of stuck in here, but I think that should be fine. It's not really anywhere important. So we'll be able to put the item back in, and when we pour the resin, not resin, the next layer of silicone, it will mold over these little ridges, and that will put an indentation in the top part. And then afterwards we can come through and just trim away all these little areas, can make them a little bit bigger, and that should give us a nice ventilation for the resin and air to escape if need be. And same for the ends down here, we can sort of cut those out later and have a nice pour areas at the top. I think it's going to work. I hope, at least. So yeah, one more thing before we put around the bricks and put the items back in, just have to clean up the edges of the mold, just so it's easier to put the blue bricks around. So this one you can just be a bit quicker. So I've got my gloves on, got the scales, I've got the cup that we used last time. I cleaned it out, the silicone just peels right out, and it should be good to use again. The mold is prepped. I've also prepped a mini one here with a little barrel on the bottom taped down, just in case we have some leftover silicone. We can pour it in here so we don't waste it. So yeah, I think once we start mixing this, it's going to set off the chain reaction. So I might just wipe over some Mr. Silicone barrier now on the mold, and then we can mix the silicone. Okay, so I think actually this might be just enough for this mold, so I'm not going to bother cracking this tin open yet. We do have 20 minutes once we put in the hardening agent, so I'll gamble, and hopefully this is enough. If not, we'll have to make a little bit of this tin. So we've got 226 grams of silicone. That means we need 9 grams of the hardening agent, and that should be how much is left. So let's just pour it in now. Actually, I'll zero this, so 226. So it's been about almost 8 hours now, so this should be set. Yeah, that's pretty hard. So let's, crack it open and see how it turned out. I'm pretty excited and a bit anxious to see if it worked well. But yeah, let's pop the bricks off and then we can peel the mold apart. So, moment of truth time. I've removed all the blue blocks, plucked off all the extras, and we can see the clay at the top here, so that's good. And yeah, now all we have to do is just slowly peel it apart, and hopefully it's all good on the inside. Can't quite remember where the seal is actually, so I just have to, I guess it's along this bottom line, I guess, or top. There we go. It's pretty impressive. It's pretty impressive how the silicone kind of seals. You can't really see it, so you just have to kind of find where that mark is, and then just slowly try and pry it apart. I guess this is why you should probably be a bit more liberal with the silicone barrier on the sides. That's something I'll keep in mind for next time. Let's start on the side. Yeah, definitely going to apply more of that silicone barrier next time. So this is actually quite a bit tighter than the last time I did this one here. It's not too bad, I guess, but okay, slowly coming off. There we go. That was tight. Okay, so next time I'm going to apply a lot more silicone barrier. So I do recommend silicone barrier, put lots on just before you pour the mold. The first ones I did with this, I didn't have any issues like this at all. But you can kind of see down here where it's kind of really set in. Yeah, it's a bit of a pain in the ass, but oh well, all good. We'll know that for next time. It's kind of teared it a little bit there. But I guess we'll learn from these mistakes. So now that the two molds have been made, what we need to do, we need to trim all this up, tidy up, and get it ready for pouring the resin. So I guess that should be what we jump onto now. But before I do that, I just want to go over a few things, a few, I guess, issues and errors from making this one so far, and lessons learned. First one being is, especially with an item that's kind of jagged in the end here, you do have to be quite careful when you push it in and out of the ends. I'm hoping when we close this it should seal up, but it's pretty messy. It's not going to be that tidy. But hopefully the resin won't leak too much. But the main thing is, when you pour in the second one, is to use lots of the silicone barrier, especially around the areas where there's nooks and crannies, to make sure none of the silicone merges with the previously molded stuff. And because we peeled this off, we've got a couple of cracks and marks in here, which may cause issues when we pour resin. Maybe there'll be some leaks, hopefully not, but either way, I guess the lifespan of this mold won't be as long as what it could have been. However, only technically the third one ever made, and still learning, but I guess we won't know what the final results will be like until we finish it. So let's trim it up, get it ready for pouring the resin. And here we are, one mold, two mold, they're complete, so it's time to prep them for pouring the resin. So I guess first off we'll start off with this one here, since it's going to take a bit more work to get ready before we can pour. Actually, it's not that much, but we're just going to give it a bit of a clean, use some silicone barrier, and using some big chunky rubber bands will hold it together. Because obviously once we start pouring the resin, we don't want it to leak out or anything like that. And apparently rubber bands is the way you go about keeping it together. We don't want to put too much pressure, otherwise you can kind of squish and bend the silicone in a weird way, which will cause, again, defects and possibly leaks. So, before we kind of apply everything, since these have been sitting out for about a day, I have tried to keep them upside down to avoid dust, but in case anything got in there, I've got some candy. I'm just going to give them a little bit quick spray to make sure there's A, no dust, or B, any weird silicone bits from trimming. Okay, so here we go. We've got all the rubber bands on it, and it's kind of keeping it tight. You don't want it to be easily to come apart. So in here is quite good, but again, you can't find the right balance between too tight and too loose. These single ones here, probably a little bit too loose, but if you double them up, it's going to get too tight, and it's kind of a bit of a weird size, so it's hard to get a right amount of tightness on. But these ones here, which I did double up, might be fractionally a bit too tight, but since it's in the middle here, it should be fine. It shouldn't distort it, hopefully at least. But everywhere else, it seems to be holding in pretty well. And yeah, this mold obviously we don't need, so it's just pouring straight in. So we got 1, 2, and 3 molds prepped. This is just the backup in case we've got a little bit extra resin. This one shouldn't take too much, maybe like 5-7 grams worth. This one here, I've applied the silicone barrier, so we just have to pour straight into it, which should be nice and easy. And then yeah, this one, obviously we're going to pour in through the top. The resin we're using is going to be the crystal resin, which you saw at the start of the video. This one has a ratio of 100 to 50, so for every 100 grams of resin we need 50 grams of the hardening agent. Because the resin is clear, I've got this blue cyan resin dye that I'm going to use. We'll add this in to get a nice blue colour. I'm not really sure how much we're going to need, we'll just kind of eye it up. Don't have anything specific that we're going for, so it's pretty much artistic license there. Also got rubber gloves, which we'll definitely need with the resin. But compared to the silicone molding, which was, at least for me at this stage, a bit more of a guessing game for how much you need, with the resin we can guesstimate how much we'll need, and by doing that I'm just going to weigh how heavy the actual items are, because I'm going to assume these are originally resin as well. So basically for whatever this weighs is how much resin we'll need to mix, give or take, but it's a good starting point. Gloves are on. I've got a cup that I'm going to use for the mixing. I got the mixing stick. So yeah, all that's left to do is, well, mix the resin. I just need to cut in quickly because mistakes were made, and those mistakes were with the original mold. When I poured the resin, everything was going wow, and then it started leaking from the bottom. Instead of using 2 in one mold, I've opted to go for 1 just to give me more room. I believe the issue was I didn't have enough room at the bottom to clamp down the 2 parts of the silicone. So what I've done, I've made a new mold here. As you can see, there's a lot more space down both sides and at the back, and I spent a lot more time getting it as smooth as possible, just using my finger, rubbing it and getting the clay into the right spots. And I've got a 2 mini holes here for the silicone go into for alignment, and a sort of a mini ditch down the side. And I've built up the clay a lot around the side and at the back of the effect, so we should get a nice overlap of the silicone with the 2 molds. So the second half will pour over and go down the back, and there should be a nice kind of like an interlock. So that should stop any resin from leaking out the very bottom, and it gives us a good space to clamp down. I'm hoping this one will work. We'll find out after this cut, I guess. So yeah, I hope this will work out really well. I've also got the one air escape there. So yeah, I'm going to make the molds and pour the resin, then we'll be able to crack it open and see if it worked. Woohoo! Okay, so it's time for the big reveal. This is This is the second casting of this item. So this is the first one we popped out earlier. This time I put in a little bit more resin on the bottom and tried to poke it in, and hopefully that removed a lot of air bubble issues. And this is the second mold for the blast, and this one is just a single one, so we'll crack this open and see what it's like. Just a reminder, this is what we're kind of hoping for, something that resembles something as close to this as possible. And yeah, hopefully we didn't have any weird air bubbles. If we did, hey, at least we know what to fix for the next time, but the mold should still be reusable. Ooh, actually, which one should we pop out first? Ooh, let's do this one first actually, and then we can get into this one. So again, when you want to pop them out, just kind of wiggle around the sides to loosen it up, try and get some air in underneath, and that should just slide right out. Oh, that one's looking good. Yeah, that's nice. And it's only been about 24 hours. It's still actually a little bit flexible, so I might just have to leave this actually for a little bit longer to fully harden up. But if you look at the two here, I put in a bit more dye this time, so it's a bit more of a richer colour, and we got some more peaks coming through as well, which looks really good. So for the little bit flaps here, it's got some trimmers, and you just go through it and just trim it off. Since it's still really soft at the moment, it's probably a good time to do that. Any areas that kind of need a bit of trimming, you can just trim it off. Yeah, I think that should be it. There's only a couple of bits. Yeah, it looks good. Now we just have to let it sit for probably another 5 or so hours, and it should fully harden. It says 24 to 36, but I guess it depends on the temperature. Last time I only left it for 24 hours and it was perfectly fine. I guess the room this time was a bit cooler, I guess, and I also used more dye, so that might also have an effect on that. But anyway, we'll put it aside now. It should be fine. Doesn't really need a mold because it does have its shape. We've got the mold 2.0, and it's filled with resin. We had no links. I had rubber bands going all the way around the bottom, top, and the lengthways as well, but I've removed those since we don't need them, in just to save bird time. So let's pop the last remaining rubber band off. Just going to work around the edges to loosen it up. Oh, look at that, that's looking good. The mold's looking really clean. A little bit of resin on the side here, so obviously it did leak slightly, but not too bad. Yeah, let's pop it out. That looks really good. Needs a little bit of a cleaning up, and as you can see, it's pretty flexible, so I might have to leave that to fully harden. That should take about a day or so. But let's get rid of the runoff resin. So using some model clippers here, just come in and give that a bit of a clip, and for the top here as well. Yeah, that's looking good. There's a little bit of a clean up down the sides, but overall I think it's pretty good. A little bit extra resin on the bottom. But we can just go through with a knife and just clean that up, I reckon. But yeah, overall I think that looks pretty good. The hole here has worked out really well as well, so what I might do, while it's still a bit soft, I'll get a stand and just try and push it in. If it's a bit tight, it should loosen up a little bit. Okay, so I've got the Tamashi stand here, and just got the small end, and that should just, oh look at that, it's perfect. And then this will join in on the bottom. Oh man, that's going to be very good. Okay, so all we have to do now is basically let it set, tidy up, and we're done. Okay, so everything is done, and man, that was a fun experience. A few trials and tribulations along the way, some running silicone here and there, and the resin leak, but in the end I think everything turned out well. I've done a couple of casts now with the molds and played around with using different amounts of the colouring. The first ones came out pretty dark. I used about 7 drops, and then I halved that down to about 4, and it seems, with the amount of resin I'm using, anywhere from 2 to 3 drops or 4 seems about right, and you don't see too much difference there. But yeah, the first blast that came out had quite a bit more silicone stuck down the seam, so it took a bit more work to clean up, but overall it's still looking pretty good. I think the next step is to create my own custom item to do a molding of now, but for a first test learning experience, this has worked out really well. I really do encourage you to go out and try and practice making your own silicone molds and resin casts. And yeah, thank you very much for watching. I know this has been a very long video, so I do appreciate that. And if you enjoyed it, please hit that like button and subscribe, and let me know in the comments below what you think of the final product. Cool, thanks for watching, cheers.